I remember waking up one morning, already feeling drained before the day even began. It wasn't the kind of tired that sleep or a lazy afternoon could fix. It was a heavy weight settled deep inside my mind, like a fog I couldn't shake off. My body rose from the bed mechanically, but inside, there was this constant tension, this low hum of unease that refused to pause. All day, I carried it with me, as if a part of me was always on edge, waiting for something to go wrong, second-guessing every move, replaying moments that didn't even feel important. Then night would come, but instead of rest, exhaustion wrapped around me tighter because my mind never really switched off. For a long time, I thought I just needed more rest, maybe a vacation or a break from life's demands. But the truth hit me slowly and painfully. No matter how much I tried to relax, my brain stayed trapped in this loop, a loop of thoughts I didn't even notice were controlling me. It wasn't just stress or worry. It was something more insidious, more exhausting, because it didn't come from outside pressures alone. It came from inside, a relentless barrage of anxious thoughts that drained every ounce of mental energy I had. It's a strange kind of weariness. You see it in others, people who seem fine on the surface, holding it together no matter what. But beneath that calm exterior is a mind spinning ceaselessly, chasing what-ifs, rehearsing conversations, fearing mistakes, and drowning in the what-could-happen scenarios. That exhaustion isn't something you can simply sleep through or power past. It's a silence shattered by the noise inside your own head. I want you to imagine this. Your mind as a room that should be peaceful and quiet when it's time to rest. But instead, it feels like someone left the radio playing in the background. Static, broken melodies, urgent whispers you can't quite make sense of. You try to turn it off, to close the door, but these sounds keep creeping back, louder each time you try. You start feeling like you're stuck in a place where everything in your mind demands your attention, your worry, your energy. And yet, you wonder, how did I get here? How did resting ever become so hard? The answer isn't simple, but the first step is recognizing that this kind of mental exhaustion has its own language. It speaks through those fleeting thoughts we often dismiss. Thoughts like, what if I messed up earlier? Did I say the wrong thing? What's going to go wrong tomorrow? Maybe I'm not doing enough. These aren't strange or alien voices. They sound familiar, almost normal. So normal, in fact, that most of us don't realize they're the culprits holding us hostage. I've lived with these voices for years, quiet at times, deafening at others, always pulling me away from the calm I desperately wanted. This isn't a story only about me. It's about so many of us who have been taught to push through, to stay strong, and to believe that rest is just a pause from work, not a vital need for the mind itself. We get caught in cycles of trying to solve the exhaustion by doing more rest, more work, more distraction, without stepping back to understand the internal battle happening beneath the surface. What if I told you that the thoughts you think are often not your friends? That they might be patterns built by years of survival instincts, fears, and habits, silently feeding on your energy day after day? The exhausting part is how hidden these patterns are. They don't scream at you. They whisper just loud enough to keep you unsettled. They look like harmless worries but act like chains, binding you to fatigue no medicine or vacation can cure. When I recognized this, it was like someone flipped a switch. It didn't suddenly make everything easy, but it gave me a starting point, a way back to myself. Understanding that these thoughts were not facts, but habits that could be noticed and, most importantly, changed, became a turning point. It meant I was no longer a victim of my racing mind, but a participant in my healing. This journey I'm sharing isn't about quick fixes or empty platitudes. It's about stepping into that silent mechanism inside our heads and gently uncovering the patterns that steal our energy. It's about meeting ourselves where we are, tired, overwhelmed, and craving relief, and showing up with patience and curiosity. It's about learning to recognize the thoughts that sound normal, even comforting, but keep our brains wired and restless. We often imagine the hero's journey in stories filled with epic battles and grand gestures. But the most profound battles happen quietly inside. The real hero is the one who faces their own mind, who dares to stop the automatic loops and rediscover peace, not by escaping the chaos outside, but by transforming the noise within. So if you've ever lied awake wondering why you can't turn your mind off, or felt exhausted from a day that should have been restful, you're not alone. This story is yours, too. Together, we're about to explore those hidden thoughts that keep the tension alive, to see them clearly, and begin to reclaim the calm that has been waiting for you all along. I discovered early on that the true challenge wasn't simply noticing when my inner dialogue grew loud. It was unraveling the sneaky habits woven into my daily awareness. One evening, after a particularly restless day, I sat quietly by the window, watching the rain trace slow rivers down the glass. The relentless chatter in my head was muted by the patter of water, creating a rare space for reflection. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, not of a worry, but of a habit I hadn't recognized before. The urge to prepare endlessly for the unknown, as if rehearsing every possible outcome would somehow shield me from discomfort. This wasn't just worry. It was a form of self-command that demanded perfection, vigilance, and constant mental readiness. As I peeled back layers, I realized this compulsion to protect myself masqueraded as mindfulness, but in reality, it was running a marathon on a treadmill set too fast, exhausting, and going nowhere. It wasn't just about anticipating issues. It was about the persistent insistence that I should always be equipped, proactive, and flawless. Imagine carrying an invisible backpack layered with what-ifs so heavy it bends your posture over time, yet you don't feel the load until you finally try to rest. When experiences like these arise, it becomes crucial to differentiate between constructive planning and destructive rumination. One day, I caught myself trying to solve a problem that didn't exist yet. I was sitting with a friend, talking about future possibilities, and my mind darted to disaster scenarios, everything from small embarrassments to catastrophic failures. Noticing the spiraling cascade of maybes, I paused mid-sentence and said aloud, "I'm creating storms in a teacup here." My friend smiled and said, "Sometimes, the mind throws a party for all the things that never happen." That moment shifted something inside me. The act of naming the pattern, of giving my anxious loop a face, took away some of its power. Yet this kind of automatic hypervigilance has an uncanny way of disguising itself as responsibility. When I first faced this, it felt like a protector always ready at the gate, insisting I stay alert to threats. But upon closer inspection, I recognized it less as my ally and more like a gatekeeper who refused to open doors to peace. I sensed a constant readiness that siphoned my energy like a leaky faucet dripping minute by minute. I began to sense the daily emotional toll, a fatigue that seeped into moments I should have savored. At family dinners, while laughter echoed around me, I was distracted by rehearsing conversations or scanning for potential conflicts. The irony of being physically present but mentally elsewhere gnawed at me. Years later, I spoke to someone who described her own experience with this. She said, "It's like living with a radio that's always tuned to a disaster channel. I can't silence it, even though most shows are fiction." Her metaphor struck me deeply, not because it was unique, but because it revealed a shared condition so many endure silently. The emotional breathlessness from this constant over-alertness slowly shrinks our capacity to enjoy simple pleasures, sunsets, music, even rest itself. Now, consider how this applies when you face deadlines or speak in public. For me, the moment before stepping on stage was a battlefield of invisible battles, scenarios played out relentlessly in rapid succession. What if I mess up the words? What if they laugh at me? What if I forget? Over time, I learned to realize these mental marathons didn't predict outcomes. They merely eroded my confidence before I even started. The anticipation of failure fed the very anxiety I wanted to defeat. Understanding this habitual preoccupation revealed a new layer, the necessity to cultivate a quiet observer within. When I began practicing deliberately noticing these cycles, not judging, just observing, I carved out a space of calm amidst the noise. This internal witness became my anchor. It was like turning on a soft light in a dark room, enough to see the threads without being overwhelmed by them. One cold morning, sitting with a cup of coffee, I tried an exercise I had once read about, naming each intrusive narrative as it appeared. "There's the critic again," I'd whisper softly. "Here's the doubter." Each name was a step in reclaiming my awareness, a way to dismantle the automatic hold these patterns had on me. This practice wasn't magic. It demanded patience and persistence. The reward, though, was a subtle liberation, a feeling that I was no longer a captive but a participant in my mind's dance. I want to invite you to explore this territory with me. Notice if there's a voice inside urging you to remain relentlessly vigilant, as if surrender means danger. Can you recognize moments where mental energy is siphoned by rehearsed fears or incessant self-criticism? More than acknowledging these occurrences, can you step into the role of a curious detective, peeling back each layer without self-condemnation? Recognizing this dimension of exhaustion opens a door to kindness for ourselves and for this restless mind working overtime. It becomes clear that these cycles don't vanish overnight. Instead, patience, awareness, and commitment act as the slow-building bridges toward reprieve. The key lies not in silencing every worry, but in learning to meet them with a softer gaze, transforming relentless pressure into gentle checks rather than oppressive commands. In the unfolding story of healing, these discoveries carry weight. They remind me that rest is not just the absence of activity, but the presence of peace within the mental landscape. It's a state that, until consciously nurtured, can be elusive for those of us burdened by ceaseless internal demands. When I learned to name the patterns, I found the courage to loosen their grip, allowing space for clarity, lightness, and a renewed sense of energy to emerge. One evening, after a particularly overwhelming day, I found myself pacing the dimly lit streets near my home, searching for an escape from the swirl of relentless mental activity racing through me. The city around me was alive with distant laughter and honking cars, yet inside, I felt as if I were caught in an invisible cage whose bars were made of tension and unchecked worry. It wasn't the typical kind of stress triggered by external demands. This exhaustion seeped from within, crafted by a myriad of incessant scenarios I played repeatedly in my head, like a broken record stuck on a single anxious refrain. As I wandered those quiet sidewalks, a sudden image struck me, a river swollen with rain, rushing uncontrollably past brittle branches clinging to the shore. That river embodied the turmoil inside, a flood of unchecked intentions, hurried plans, and relentless doubts swirling without direction. I realized that much of my inner paralysis came from a relentless stream of projections, each one vying for my attention, pulling me in conflicting directions. It was as if my thoughts had formed a relentless current, eroding my emotional foundations one shallow moment at a time. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice how I often sought refuge in the illusion of control. When anxiety tightens its grip, the mind can morph into a master tactician, conjuring elaborate blueprints for imminent catastrophe. I found myself drafting detailed mental scripts of possible missteps and their consequences, not to prepare, but to soothe an unnamed fear of uncertainty. Yet, ironically, this very exercise left me feeling paralyzed, as if caught in quicksand, struggling against an invisible force that refused to let go. The more I tried to fix future outcomes, the deeper I sank into exhaustion. One particularly vivid moment came during a meeting. While colleagues discussed upcoming projects, my focus splintered between the agenda and an internal monologue replaying a recent awkward exchange with a friend. I dissected every word and gesture, painting the memory with unwarranted judgment and second-guessing my intentions in vivid detail. Suddenly, a feeling of dissociation overwhelmed me. I was physically present, yet emotionally adrift, weighed down by invisible baggage. It felt like trying to swim through molasses, my energy depleted before I even had a chance to engage fully. It was at that moment I realized part of the drain came from an intense internal feedback loop, a kind of mental looping that constantly rehashed perceived failures and hypothetical threats without offering resolution. Instead of guiding me toward constructive action, this looping reinforced defeat and self-doubt, gradually wearing me down. It was less an active problem to solve and more an unwelcome background track, contributing to chronic fatigue and emotional numbness. Seeking clarity, I experimented with a new approach, turning inward to observe this cycle without judgment. I set aside moments to sit quietly and allow unease to surface, resisting the impulse to intervene or fix it immediately. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost counterintuitive, like watching a storm brew without raising the alarm bells. Yet, over time, I began to notice subtler patterns, a repetitive tendency to anticipate trouble, a habit of mentally checking for signs of failure, and an ever-present urge to self-correct in anticipation of criticism. Recognizing these habits was like identifying the mechanics behind a machine I had unwittingly become entwined with. What struck me most was how these impulses were entwined with a deeply ingrained self-expectation, the need to constantly prove worth through hypervigilance. I carried an invisible ledger, tallying perceived mistakes and scrutinizing future performance before it even began. This ingrained mindset immobilized me more than any external circumstance ever could. Rather than empowering, this internal demand functioned as a chain wrapped tightly around my resolve. This revelation sparked another shift in perspective. I started to consider these mental loops not as enemies, but as misguided efforts by my psyche to maintain safety and predictability amid chaos. This empathetic understanding transformed my approach, replacing resistance with curiosity and judgment with acceptance. The waves didn't disappear overnight. Instead, I learned to navigate them more skillfully, catching myself before the spiral deepened. As an example, I recall one evening when I caught myself spiraling over an upcoming presentation. Instead of following my usual course of catastrophizing each potential pitfall, I gently acknowledged the fear as a messenger, not a dictator. I told myself, "Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but I'll handle this step by step." This simple acknowledgement disrupted the habitual loop, creating space for calm and intentional preparation rather than frantic worry. From these experiences, I discovered that weariness triggered by relentless mental cycling doesn't necessarily stem from the content of our concerns, but from the unyielding grip they hold on our attention. When the mind becomes a revolving door spinning in utter repetition, it deprives us of fresh breath and clarity. By cultivating an observer attitude, one that witnesses without immediately reacting, we reclaim moments of peace hidden beneath the turbulent surface. Now, I encourage you to pay attention to when your focus fractures into endless, what's next scenarios, or when your emotional energy drains unexpectedly during simple tasks. Imagine if, instead of chasing every racing impression, you allowed yourself brief pauses to step back and recognize the loops forming. This act itself begins to dismantle the exhausting machinery, providing you with renewed clarity and calm that is otherwise elusive. In the end, navigating the relentless cycles requires more than willpower. It demands a tender, ongoing conversation with ourselves that cultivates patience and insight. Through this dialogue, we unlock the possibility of shifting from constant survival mode toward a steadier, more centered existence where energy flows freely instead of seeping away. The path isn't linear or effortless, but each recognition of these patterns builds resilience and opens the door to a more restful presence inside. Late at night, when silence pressed against the walls like thick velvet, I often found myself caught in a peculiar form of unrest that wasn't born from rushing deadlines or external pressures. Instead, it emerged from a constant mental motion, a ceaseless carousel spinning relentlessly without invitation. It felt less like active worry and more like an automatic pilot stuck in a loop, endlessly circling familiar tracks that led nowhere but deeper into unease. Once, during a sleepless stretch, I likened it to swimming against an invisible current in a vast ocean, expending effort without surfacing or catching my breath. I recall a moment when this metaphor became painfully concrete. I was out hiking with a close friend, the crisp air carrying pine and earth, and yet my chest felt heavy, weighed down by subtle yet persistent preoccupations. As she chatted about plans for the weekend, I noticed my attention fraying, pulled by recurring images of unresolved conversations and imagined scenarios. It was as though a shadow was trailing me, whispering incessantly, voicing quiet alarms that I struggled to silence. My voice came out quieter than usual when she asked if I was all right. Just tired, I admitted, but the fatigue was something far beyond physical exertion. Later, alone beneath a canopy of stars, I sat on a rough-hewn log and tried to untangle the knot inside. I realized this weariness was tied to an invisible tension I carried, like a taut string pulled in many directions by the endless what-ifs and should-haves my inner dialogue spun without pause. Unlike fleeting worries, these recycled rehearsals didn't fade. They clung stubbornly, sapping vitality and dulling joy. They created a persistent backdrop of emotional strain, one that blurred the edges of my everyday moments. The surprising part wasn't just the frequency of these cycles, but how embedded they had become. They hustled quietly, masked by routines and commitments, yet their subtle energy drain felt as debilitating as any physical ailment. I found myself craving stillness more deeply, though paradoxically, stillness often triggered their return, a restless echo chamber in the silence. Trying to stare them down or push them away only magnified their presence, like glare bouncing back from polished glass. It was on a particularly restless afternoon when an insight took shape. I was leafing through a worn copy of a meditation guide when a line grabbed me. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the turbulence, but how we fight the turbulence. That struck a chord. Instead of resisting or avoiding discomfort, what if I leaned in gently? What if the pull of these repeated narratives could be softened not by battle, but by acceptance? It was a revolutionary idea, unsettling yet promising. Taking this new approach into the forest the next day, I shifted from a posture of resistance to curiosity. When anxiety nudged me, instead of recoiling, I named it softly, like greeting a stranger. There you are again. I wasn't trying to fix or silence it. I viewed these mental loops as messages signaling unmet needs or unresolved emotions, like distant sirens rather than intruders. This change in relationship with inner unrest didn't erase it immediately, but it tempered its intensity, allowing space to breathe between episodes. This process reminded me of someone I once met at a retreat, a quiet woman named Hannah, who described her battle with relentless daily fatigue not as a fight, but as a conversation. She spoke vividly of taking the edge off each day, gently acknowledging the drain without letting it consume her. I gave up trying to outrun what was chasing me, she said, and started walking alongside it. Her words stayed with me because they shifted the narrative from confrontation to companionship, a mindset I hadn't imagined possible. As days turned into weeks, this approach infused my experience with newfound depth. When pressure mounted or social interactions stirred swirling reflections, I discovered a subtle skill, the ability to pause and recognize the mental spinning without becoming entangled. For instance, during a family gathering, as a tension-filled exchange replayed silently in my chest, I whispered inwardly, "This is happening again, but I don't have to believe every part." That quiet detachment didn't diminish my feelings, but gently loosened their hold. What was illuminating about this shift was how it revealed hidden dimensions of tiredness beyond physicality. Emotional layers woven from unspoken expectations, habitual mental rehearsals, and unresolved fragments of past experiences. By honoring that complexity, I could nurture a more compassionate inner landscape that fostered resilience. Problems didn't disappear, nor did uncertainty fade, but I found strength in embracing the discomfort rather than fleeing it. In this ongoing journey toward reclaiming clarity and ease, moments of rest became not just times of inactivity, but opportunities to practice this newly found dialogue with internal unrest. It transformed evenings into spaces for exploration rather than escape, inviting me to witness the cycles with openness instead of judgment. Have you ever noticed how sometimes our energy dissipates not because of tasks or challenges, but because invisible currents beneath the surface pull relentlessly? What if, instead of pushing harder or seeking quick fixes, you allowed yourself the grace to meet those currents with genuine curiosity? This gentle engagement could be the first step toward dismantling weariness from inside out, revealing a path to genuine renewal. One afternoon, while sitting in a crowded cafe, I noticed a subtle shift unfolding within me, not an abrupt revelation, but a quiet unraveling of long-held habits. Around me, conversations hummed, cups clinked, and the barista's call cut through the background like a familiar melody. Yet, beneath this lively scene, a restless current tugged at my attention, drawing me toward an internal script that replayed with invisible urgency. It struck me then how often I treated those swirling mental loops as badges of dedication or signs of my seriousness about life's challenges. I had mistaken relentless mental activity for productivity, without realizing it was sapping my vitality. That moment sparked a new awareness. Much of this mental exhaustiveness masqueraded as effort, as if sheer persistence could outpace exhaustion. But simply pushing harder deepened the weariness, piling on invisible demands that left me emotionally bankrupt. I imagined carrying a backpack weighted with stones labeled "must think," "must plan," "must control," unaware that the relentless accumulation was the primary cause of my fatigue. The idea hit me. Could it be that the most exhausting thing wasn't external stress, but this internal compulsion to stay perpetually on? Later that week, during a walk through a bustling park, I observed children at play. How effortlessly they shifted focus between imagination and presence. Watching a little girl spin gleefully without concern for yesterday or tomorrow, it dawned on me how much energy adults lose when trapped inside habitual cycles of mental chatter. Children have a natural ability to flow between moments, shedding and donning awareness like clothing. Adults, in contrast, often armor themselves in patterns of endless anticipation. This gave me a fresh metaphor. What if my constant rumination acted like a sticky web, trapping me and distorting perception? The more I struggled to break free, the more entangled I became. On returning home, I attempted an experiment. I committed to welcoming moments when my inner activity intensified, instead of attempting to smother or ignore them. When the familiar surge of worry began to rise, I leaned into it, curious about its texture and shape. I noted that many times this surge wasn't about immediate dangers or pressing problems, but triggered by a subtle nervous habit, a habitual reflex to fix, adjust, or predict outcomes regardless of their likelihood. Recognizing this felt like peeling away a layer of fog from a window, clarifying the landscape beyond the habitual cloudiness. This shift was not painless. Often, embracing unrest brought discomfort, confronting me with parts of myself I regularly tried to dismiss or control. It reminded me of a friend who once confessed, "Facing my anxiety felt like stepping into a crowded room full of silent accusations. I wasn't prepared for how loud that silence could be." I understood then that turbulence inside leaves an imprint beyond mere fatigue. It can isolate, fracture, and dim our connection with ourselves and those around us. Yet, it was precisely through turning toward those silent shadows that healing began to take root. I recall sitting by the window one drizzly morning, notebook in hand, jotting down phrases and images that surfaced during moments of heightened tension. Rather than censoring or resisting, I let these expressions flow, a blend of fears, hopes, and fragmented narratives tangled beneath my conscious mind. This unfiltered expression felt like opening a valve on a pressure cooker releasing built-up steam. Inevitably, it created space for fresh air and lightness to move in afterward. The practice wasn't about erasing internal narratives, but about making them visible and less intimidating. This journey also revealed how deeply woven expectations drive the momentum of mental busyness. A deep-rooted belief that productivity equates to worthiness pushed me to equate quiet with failure. Accepting stillness felt taboo, as if rest signified laziness or weakness. Breaking free required dismantling this link and learning that real strength often hides in moments of pause and surrender. I began recognizing that calm doesn't come from frantic attempts at control, but from learning to inhabit silence with openness and trust. One evening, during a casual chat with my sister, I noticed something new. As I shared my struggles openly, I no longer attempted to fix my feelings or impose logic onto them. Instead, I simply acknowledged the messiness with a gentle smile. "It's exhausting," I said quietly. She nodded. "Because you're carrying expectations you never agreed to." This simple exchange crystallized a profound truth. I wasn't just wrestling with worry. I was wrestling with the weight of unvoiced demands. Letting those go started to lighten the load. Now, consider times when your attention fractures, shifting between countless what-if scenarios, or when emotional barriers drain your joy without clear cause. Imagine approaching those moments not with frustration, but with a compassionate eye, inviting curiosity about why your energy dips and where your focus travels. This newfound inquisitiveness can loosen the grip of invisible chains and usher in an unexpected form of freedom. A freedom born not from perfect control, but from an intimate understanding of one's own inner rhythms. Ultimately, the path forward demands an alliance with our internal experience, an ongoing dance between courage and gentleness, effort, and release. Through this intricate balance, we can transform the ceaseless consumption of our energy into a reservoir of renewal. Each conscious step taken without judgment brings us closer to reclaiming the clarity and vitality long obscured beneath layers of automatic reaction. I remember the moment when I first realized that my mental fatigue wasn't simply a consequence of thinking too much, but stemmed from the way I related to those thoughts themselves. It dawned on me during a conversation with an old friend, someone who had mastered the art of presence despite facing her own anxieties. She said something that shifted my perspective entirely. It's not the noise that breaks you, it's how tightly you hold onto the radio. Her words echoed in my chest, unraveling years of gripping, invisible tension. That insight prompted me to examine the grip those persistent worries had on my emotions. How often I clung desperately to scenarios I imagined, rehearsed, or feared, unwilling to release them even fleetingly. The energy I spent gripping these thoughts turned into a mental adhesive, binding me to exhausting loops instead of letting me float through them with ease. Like a sailor clutching a weathered rope during a storm, my endurance was impressive, but I was wearing down from strain. The next discovery came when I noticed how these recurring scripts often hid themselves in seemingly productive mental habits. I'd sit at my desk, compiling endless mental lists of what to do if, or how to prevent, convincing myself that preparation was my shield. However, these rehearsals rarely led to action, but instead became elaborate tapestries of imagined response that subtly tightened a noose around my ability to relax. It reminded me of a playwright endlessly rewriting the same scene, never quite ready to let the story move on. Once, on a rainy afternoon, I attempted a different approach. Instead of triggering automatic problem solving, I rehearsed an internal dialogue that invited my worries to simply exist without demanding attention or solutions. As odd as it sounds, allowing those apprehensions to linger quietly, without fueling them, drained their urgency. Through this experiment, I realized that much of my exhaustion grew from trying to negotiate or control fleeting images and fears, relentlessly battling shadows that lost their power when acknowledged without resistance. Driving home from a late meeting another night, I caught myself cycling through thoughts of past mistakes and perceived failures, each thought tipping me closer to exhaustion. Suddenly, I paused and said aloud, "What if I am allowed to be imperfect?" The words surprised me with their gentleness, cutting through the harsh chorus of self-criticism. That spontaneous act of kindness wasn't a fix, but it created a crack, a splitting of my once impermeable armored mindset, through which light started leaking in. Proceeding from this small breakthrough, I experimented with softening my relationship with my own internal chatter. Instead of trying to suppress or silence it, I listened attentively, like engaging in a delicate conversation with someone grieving. This empathy gradually transformed my experience. The previously overwhelming flood now revealed subtle currents, hidden fears about acceptance, vulnerability, and belonging that, once surfaced, seemed less threatening and more like invitations for healing. Another evening, while writing in my journal, I confronted a profound question. What if my worth isn't bound to my productivity or how much I control? Wrestling with this challenge liberated a part of me long confined. It was as though I'd been carrying a locked box labeled value, and only recently found the key to pry it open. The revelation led me to notice how frequently I disguised exhaustion as stubbornness, how weariness masked itself as persistence, and how fatigue was often a signal, not a failure. In personal interactions, I began identifying patterns where mental loops had fueled unintended friction. During an argument with my sibling, I realized I was reacting not only to the words exchanged, but also to the inner narratives spiraling in my head about blame and rejection. Recognizing this shifted everything. I could step back, acknowledge the tenderness beneath our clashing emotions, and respond with greater clarity and calm. The tension melted gradually into understanding, revealing the emotional savings possible when we process inner noise with gentleness. Now, consider moments when your inner dialogue persuades you to dwell on what you should have said or done, locking you in a replay that drains energy and focus. What would happen if you whispered to those fragments, "I see you, but I'm choosing peace over perfection today"? Such an utterance could become a lifeline, anchoring you to calmer seas. This practice demands courage, a willingness to embrace uncertainty instead of fighting it, tenderness instead of tension. Through every step of this unfolding journey, the invitation remains clear: to loosen your grasp, to treat your inner experiences as guests rather than captors. Progress might arrive in small, quiet moments when your heart softens even slightly, when you choose observation over reaction. These gestures, subtle as a dawn breeze, gradually reshape the landscape of weariness, opening avenues for restoration once thought inaccessible. Reflecting on this journey so far, I sense the subtle current that has been carrying us through layers of experience, weaving strands of insight into a complex tapestry. It's as if we have been navigating a labyrinth inhabited by shadows, not hostile, but persistent companions who never truly vanish, merely shifting shape with the light. These shadows invite us to deepen our understanding, to lean into the spaces between thought and feeling, to perceive not only the contours of discomfort, but the fragile threads of possibility threaded within them. I recall a moment late at night, sitting by a flickering candle's glow, where the silence around me contrasted starkly with the inner stirrings I had grown to know intimately. In that fragile stillness, there was a remarkable tension, an invisible dance between resistance and surrender that humbles the heart. The fatigue that had etched lines beneath my eyes did not demand to be conquered outright. Instead, it pleaded to be witnessed with tenderness, as one would tend to a delicate wound that marks survival rather than defeat. It dawned on me that the journey we undertake is not a sprint toward eradication of turmoil, but a slow, reverent unfolding, like petals veiling treasures within. As days and nights blurred into one another, I noticed how the mind's relentless patterns exerted a gravitational pull, an invisible force that shapes our reality and coerces our energy away from the realms where creativity and peace breathe freely. Yet, beneath this force, a quieter rhythm beckoned, an invitation to attune ourselves to the subtleties of being, where the cacophony softens into melody. There, a transformation awaits not through sheer willpower, but through the delicate art of presence, where awareness blossoms into liberation. It is in learning to embrace the full spectrum of what stirs inside that we discover a new residence for our spirit, one that holds both the weight of our experience and the promise of renewal. It's easy to overlook how much strength is required simply to endure the ceaseless barrage of intrusive narratives that masquerade as truths. Yet, as I continued to sit with these sensations, I began sensing a shift, like clouds parting after a long storm, allowing a calm clarity to wash over a previously muddied landscape. This quiet clarity offers a space to meet ourselves with genuine kindness and to loosen the invisible chains forged by our own expectations and fears. It asks us to trust the process of gradual transformation, acknowledging that breakthroughs often arrive softly, in whispered moments rather than dramatic upheavals. There is a certain courage involved in this endeavor, a willingness to confront the unseen battles waged within the recesses of our minds with an open heart. Each time I allowed curiosity to replace judgment, it was as though a window opened, inviting light to spill into darkened corners where tension had long dwelled. This illumination does not erase complexity or pain but reframes them, reminding me that even in vulnerability there is profound strength, and in uncertainty, fertile ground for growth. The paradox of this realization is that the very thoughts that drained me also provided invitation. The same currents threatening to pull me under were the ones that offered propulsion toward something new. As we step closer to the culmination of this exploration, I sense the emergence of a delicate balance, a vantage point from which the entanglement of mind and emotion begins to loosen. It feels akin to walking a tightrope stretched between the past's heavy burdens and the vast expanse of possibility ahead. Our task is not to speed along but to steady ourselves, embracing the oscillations of doubt and faith alike, learning to sway without falling. In that precarious equilibrium lies the profound potential for reclaiming energy and reclaiming ourselves. I invite you, then, to hold this place with me, a place marked not by certainty but by willingness to engage, a sanctuary where isolation yields to connection and exhaustion gives way to quiet resilience. Here, within the complexity and the stillness, lies the unfolding of a deeper truth, a rhythm that patiently waits to be heard, a light eager to be gently uncovered. This is where our shared story leads, poised on the cusp of revelation, ready to step beyond what has been known into a space alive with possibility and awakening. There were moments in my journey when surrender seemed nearly impossible, when the weight pressing on my chest whispered lies, convincing me that rest equated to weakness and that stillness invited defeat. I remember standing on the edge of exhaustion, torn between pushing forward and the unfamiliar impulse to pause, breathe, and listen. It was in those fragile spaces that I first glimpsed the paradox at the heart of this struggle. True resilience does not demand endless endurance, but rather an openness to vulnerability, an invitation to honor the delicate limits of our inner world. As I learned to meet that relentless internal current with grace instead of resistance, a quiet transformation unfolded, not like a thunderclap shattering silence, but like dawn's gradual peeling back of night's shadows. I began to realize how much energy had been lost in futile battles, how many moments of peace had slipped away beneath the surface of relentless activity. This realization was both liberating and humbling. It asked me to reset my relationship to urgency, shifting from a posture of control to one of companionship with uncertainty and impermanence. I recall a particular evening, sitting by the window as rain traced silver threads down the glass, feeling a softening in my chest that I hadn't encountered before. The usual frenzy of restless anticipation had quieted, replaced by a gentle curiosity about what stirred beneath. In that space, exhaustion no longer screamed for immediate escape but invited a deeper, more tender conversation, a chance to explore not only the shadows but the small flickers of light waiting to be nurtured. It was as if the storm within had thinned enough to allow a glimpse of the horizon beyond. During conversations with close friends, I shared how these internal revolutions shifted my essence, how releasing the need to constantly strategize allowed room for authentic presence. "You've become a gardener for your own soul," one said, tending the soil patiently until the blossoms arrive. Their words painted a new landscape for me, a place where healing is not a grand conquest, but a steady cultivation filled with both setbacks and triumphs. It dawned clearer. The journey toward restoration unfolds in rhythms, some slow and steady, others sudden and unexpected. In quiet moments alone, I began to cherish fragments of stillness not as voids to be feared, but as fertile grounds for renewal. I discovered that fatigue could be a messenger, signaling invitations to realign with what nurtures rather than depletes, to reclaim agency over my own well-being. This shift changed everything. Instead of fighting the tides, I learned to paddle with them, embracing the ebb and flow of emotional energy with compassion and discernment. Our experiences with mental exhaustion aren't isolated instances, but collective narratives woven deeply into human existence. Each of us carries unseen burdens, echoes of internal struggles shaped by countless subtle habits and inherited patterns. Recognizing this connection dissolves isolation and fosters a shared compassion, reminding me that while the path is uniquely personal, so too is it universally human. We are, after all, wanderers seeking safe harbors in the turbulent seas of our minds. If there is one constant I have come to trust, it is the power of gentle awareness, the kind that neither forces nor yields but simply witnesses with kindness and presence. In embracing that power, I have found a sanctuary within myself, a place where perpetual agitation softens and true rest becomes attainable. It is not a destination but a living practice, a sacred dialogue with the rhythms that shape our inner worlds. So, I invite you now to pause, to grant yourself permission to sit with whatever arises without expectation or judgment. You do not need to fight invisible battles ceaselessly or carry burdens not meant to be yours alone. Instead, you might meet your inner currents with a tender gaze, acknowledging their existence as part of your story without surrendering your peace to them. In this quiet invitation lies a profound reclaiming, a turning toward a life infused with clarity, balance, and gentle strength. In stepping back from relentless mental churn, we step forward into ourselves. That forward step is not always measured by grand accomplishments, but by the small, courageous acts of presence throughout ordinary days. It is here, in the subtle art of being fully with what is, without needing to change or fix, that the possibility of healing and renewal quietly blooms. And I, alongside you, hold that unfolding with awe, hope, and unwavering trust in the resilience that dwells within us all.